because a few people at the top became a little too greedy. The biggest banks in America went bankrupt. People lost trust in the country's financial system. Bank runs occurred every week and institutions collapsed on a monthly basis. The country faced the worst financial crisis since 1929. The epidemic spread to every country in the world, and the entire world's population suffered as we were on the verge of a complete financial collapse. If the Fed hadn't injected $700 billion into the market, the modern economy as we know it might have ended in 2008. Today on Business Mob, let's discuss something similar that is happening all the way across the globe. This is the case. People in China's province of Henan are protesting by lying on the road because local banks have made it impossible for them to withdraw their savings. Protesters claim banks in China's most populous province have stolen around 30 billion yuan, or roughly $4.5 billion. Effects of this have already started to spread. As you can see in this clip here from Shanghai, people all over China are losing trust in the country's financial system. Many believe that if the situation is not handled properly by the CCP, it will spread to the global economy, putting even more strain on the already fragile global economy in 2022. Citizens on the street are protesting that bank investors stole approximately $4.5 billion in deposits from banks, but in order to understand where this $4.5 billion went, we must first understand how local banks in China operate. In a manner similar to credit unions in the United States, unlike credit unions, local banks are supposed to only serve residents in their locality. There are laws in place to ensure that local banks do not expand outside of their locality because growing too fast is a big problem, especially in the banking sector. The Chinese government has set a clear role for China's rural banks. They are required to focus on supporting the financial needs of counties and rural areas, particularly small businesses and farmers. More than 40% of China's 1.3 billion people live in rural areas, so it is critical for President Xi Jinping to ensure that regulations are in place to protect the rural population. However, approximately 4,000 banks serve these rural areas. Almost all of them are extremely vulnerable to local economic downturns. Growing outside of the locality was one way to combat this reliance on local economies. So, these local banks found a way around the law. The law said that local banks can't go out of their locality, so instead of going out, they advertised online and found new customers while staying in their locality. In reality, this wasn't really a loophole, especially in China, where CCP wishes the law, but no one seemed to enforce the law, giving banks free rein to do a lot of things in the gray area. Offering quite high interest rates was one of the major ways local banks were able to attract new depositors. Depositors were promised a yield of more than 4%, which I'm sure doesn't sound like much to many of my Wall Street Bet subscribers, but consider that this is essentially a risk-free rate. 4% is a relatively high rate. Working deposits at these local banks increased exponentially, but as they say, more money, more problems. One major issue with rapid growth is that banks must figure out how to make money off of those deposits in order to pay 4% back and hopefully keep some profits. Unfortunately, even in China, there aren't many ways to earn more than 4% without much risk. Now, this is what regulators are looking into right now, but I'm sure most of you have already seen this movie in the crypto market and in 2008, a company offering insane amounts of yield to attract deposits. Only way to earn that yield is to either take a massive amount of risk or pull a Bernie Madoff where you pay old customers using new customers. Let's give these banks the benefit of the doubt and assume they aren't pulling a Bernie Madoff. That would mean that banks were making highly risky loans to low credit-worthy people in order to earn that 4% yield, and when COVID hit in 2020, default rates on these loans skyrocketed in part due to the CCP's zero-COVID policy. On the other hand, because of the stagnant economy, people began withdrawing their deposits to pay for necessities. Now that regulators could see the problems coming, they had constantly warned about the dangerous ways these banks were operating, but enforcement was still slow. Many blamed this slow enforcement on corruption, claiming that many government officials were directly benefiting from the bank's risky practices. Things got even worse when the second wave of COVID hit China in April 2022, when 4 local banks in Henan shut down withdrawals. People were unable to access bank websites, apps, or call lines, and when they attempted to withdraw cash, it kept telling them that the card had failed. Customers lost their life savings as a result. College funds and business working capital were cut off overnight. Now, more than 3 months later, the money is still out of reach and the prospect of recovering it is dwindling by the day. According to data, over 400,000 customers have been affected and over $180 million have been frozen between 4 local banks. To protest the situation and incompetence of Chinese regulators, citizens decided to organize a protest. CCP caught wind of this, and on the day of the protest, most protesters discovered that their health code had turned red. Red health code is equivalent to jail in current China, where freedom of movement is strictly dictated by a color code system imposed by the government. The government imposed this system to control the spread of the virus, but the protests were mostly negative, so this was just an attempt by the government to kill the news of a bank run by the CCP, because the CCP didn't want the news spreading to other provinces. This is because the modern financial system is built on trust, but the news spread anyway. On Tuesday, June 9, a video of a long line at an ICBC bank in China, one of the country's largest state-owned banks, was posted on Twitter, implying that corruption is in the works. The tweet reads, "The bank card system is locked, and these people are here to unlock it. Massive runs are coming." Blogger Jennifer Zhang has reported major issues with withdrawing cash from banks in Shanghai in recent days, the uncertainty no doubt exacerbated by the prospect of more lockdowns as COVID cases again spike. She stated, "All banks in Shanghai have restricted depositors from withdrawing money. A bank run is about to sweep China." The lack of reporting about the clear signs of a bank run in China is somewhat surprising. As HSBC China's Yufan Liu puts it, the rise of China as a global economic power has caused concern that a crisis in Chinese banking could lead to a worldwide downturn similar to the global financial crisis. Investors are keeping a close eye on the government's investigation into the Henan bank run, which, when combined with the Evergrande and China's real estate crisis, has the potential to turn into something nuclear, in financial terms, of course. China's massive real estate sector, which accounts for up to 30% of its GDP, is crumbling. Property loans account for nearly 30% of outstanding loans with China's financial institutions. Evergrande, one of the country's largest developers, is undergoing a massive restructuring after defaulting on its debt late last year. While many analysts believe China's banking system was largely immune to the Evergrande crisis, cracks are beginning to appear, and if this bank run intensifies, already volatile global markets could face an awful event even more significant than Evergrande.